Spotlight, a program which looks at issues of interest to you. Welcome to tonight's program with Dr. Grantley Warren.
That the Constitution of Guyana recognizes and equates women's rights as a human right is indisputable. Section 212G of the Constitution enabled the creation of the Women and Gender Equality Commission as one of 4 commissions which in a fundamental way were intended to affect the enshrining of fundamental rights and the rule of law in this country. Without a doubt, this has not always been the case, and it is precisely because it has not been so that the society found it necessary to have a commission such as this one established to address a problem which in a fundamental sense has been affecting, is affecting, and will continue to affect the achievement of the full potential of a just and equitable society, which is essential to maintain a sustainable order, which every citizen, no doubt, wishes for. What was it in our condition that saw our lawmakers find it necessary to create such a commission? What was supposed to be the remit of this commission? How realistically should we expect it to operate? What kinds of timeframes should we be setting ourselves to achieve specific objectives and targets? What should we evaluate, or how should we evaluate its performance? To assist us with this general inquiry, and at the same time looking at what is captioned as the agenda for women, are women who are no stranger to the issues. We have on the one hand Ms. Indrani Chandrapal, who is currently the head of the commission, the Women and the Gender Equality Commission, apart from the fact that she herself comes out of and represents, to a certain extent, has been nominated at least by the Women's Progressive Organization, the women's arm of the PPPC. Ms. Cheryl Sampson, who comes out of the National Congress of Women, which is the women's arm, as it were, of the People's National Congress, and who is the deputy chair of the said commission. And we have Ms. Varshni Singh, a woman's advocate, head of Kids First Fund, and of the Citizens Advice Bureau. Ladies, welcome to Spotlight.
Thank you for having us.
Now, the best place to start is for us to get a sense of your perception of what the issues are which necessitated this Gender and Equality Commission, for instance. Why would our lawmakers think it necessary back in '96 to create such a commission?
Well,
Why don't you start, Indra?
Well, firstly, Grantley, thank you for having us here, and it is a pleasure to be here and to talk to issues relating to women. But I need to say that the Commission on Women, the National Commission on Women, was formed in 1996. It was not a constitutional commission. It was a cabinet commission, or a commission that was set up by the cabinet under the auspices of the late Dr. Cheddi Jagan. And it was at that commission meeting when he committed himself to 1/3 women in the decision making. So from there on, as Minister responsible for Women Affairs, we have been flagging that 1/3% in everything that we do. But you know, out of the Hurd-Manston Accord and the whole constitutional reform process, the issues of the Rights Commission came into being, And out of that, there were a number of NGOs, the whole NGO movement, along with all organizations, including the two women's sections of the parties, were all engaged in this process whereby we have now what is called the Constitutional Commission. And that is the same principle that we use about the 1/3 women in Parliament. So in August 2009, those commissions were we had elections, and then it took us a year after for the commission to have its meeting to nominate its chair and deputy chair. And then in 2010, in May, we started our work. And so we've already laid our first report in the National Assembly last year in May. But I'll probably let others come and let my other colleagues intervene, and then I'll come back to
Yes,
other issues.
Cheryl in particular, as you contemplate the question as to what was the raison d'etre, as it were, for the commission, you may want to reflect on the as I in my introductory comment said, that part of our condition which needed to be changed, and I presume the Women and Gender Equality Commission was intended to effect that change. What is it about our condition that was not right?
As I listened to Indra Grantley, I decided, we got to go back a little. You have to know where you came from, where you are, and where you intend to go. And I go right back to our history. It was in 1953, I think, adult suffrage, when the first 3 women went into Parliament. The other day, Gail was talking about them in their white shark skin suits.
Yeah.
We talk about the 3 J's. Jessie Burnham, Janet Jagan, and Jane Phillips Gay, the 3 J's. Those were the first 3 women. Since then, you had women's organizations coming to the fore, and people, the political parties especially, the WPO, and in those days it was the PNC, WA, the PNC Women's Auxiliary. And then you had church organizations. But whatever happened during those periods, the women were always in the background. They were the ones who did all the work and so forth, but the men were in front. And then as we moved on, we got to a point where in 1975, the United Nations talked about International Women's Year. And that first conference in Mexico brought a number of women to realize that we have the ability and we can have empowerment for women. And so from 1975, throughout the world, you had women looking at themselves differently. And so you had the United Nations Decade for Women, 75, 85. And so you had women's conferences and so forth. So you came back to your countries, and the mission then was to make certain that your governments pay attention to women. As a result of that United Nations conference, in 1976 we had what was laid in Parliament, the state paper on equality for women. And that was where it moved. So by 1980, when we had the new constitution, you had enshrined in the constitution Article 29, which talked about equality for women. And as a result of women, children's issues were looked at, because that group brought the Desiree Bernard Committee, which looked at children's, what will happen to children, where we removed the Bastille Act, where you looked at the children, born in and out of wedlock being the same children and this sort of thing. So you moved, and you moved further on. You had the 1980, 81, the establishment of the Women's Affairs Bureau, which was the governmental structure to look at what is necessary for improvement for women. You had these non-governmental organizations, all the other little women's organizations, but the Women's Affairs Bureau became that institution governmental. And from there we moved. We moved until we had the elimination of all forms of discrimination. You signed on to so many different treaties. And between that, in the 80s, you had so many different laws and acts passed in Parliament, so as to give women a greater responsibility, so that they can take their place in society. Because, when you think of it, we are educated too. We are bright, we have bright women. So why do we stay in the background? And so those were some of the steps that came before, and that sort of gave women more and more. So with the
impetus,
right, and with Women and Gender Equality Commission now being a parliamentary commission, it meant that government was now saying, look, we have this commission and the women have to take more responsibility. And I think that was sort of the build-up to what we have now.
But
And stop there for
I
a while.
just think to take up the issue that Cheryl raised, that when you look into the 90s, then you had those initiatives that were taken, the national policy document on women. For example, you had the medical termination of pregnancy bill, you had the domestic violence legislation, but we must not forget the Beijing Platform for Action, which brought women all over the world. Well, we all in our respective countries had to assess what has happened from 1975 until 1985 to where we were in 1995, because you wanted to know that the commitments all governments made around the world, that they were going to do a number of things for women, that indeed they kept their word. So the Beijing Platform for Action also was a great impetus in everything that was done after the Beijing conference, the World Conference in 1995, because there was another commitment of governments and organizations and international agencies that they will do a number of things as spelled out in the Platform for Action, and there were 12 critical areas, and all countries were required to do whatever was necessary in their respective countries to ensure that the objectives of the Beijing Platform for Action was satisfied. I'll speak to that in a little later time.
Varshini, it's interesting. These two ladies are slightly older than you are. and consequently, I'm certain that you bring a perspective to the situation and state of women and the necessity for the institutional intervention, much as we have seen, that perhaps might be slightly different from theirs, or perhaps it carries with it some more cogent understanding of the realities of the moment. What, in your view, you see as the rationale, even if you have to look at it in a historical sense, to the post-Herdmanston arrangements when the commissions were set up? Why do you think, first of all, do you think it was necessary to go that route? And what may have been some of the things that, as a younger person, you saw as essential to change, and how which would have almost set the agenda if you had to run those commissions?
That question's harder
No,
than...
Stop question.
Okay, let me try and take it in stages. I just want to say to my colleagues, I didn't know all those developments that happened from 1953 onwards, of course.
So 90% of the country either has no history or memory of it.
Actually, it started since 1946, as a matter of fact.
Well,
Long before
it's and that is the utility of this kind of program, anyway.
But it's heartening to know, and that from 1946 onwards, that women were striving to get recognition and to participate in issues concerning them. The other aspect, I think, is the need for the Gender Equality Commission was because there was inequality. So the Beijing Platform and all the other things that we signed up to was basically saying there was inequality, and to make us to commit to bringing equality, the 1/3 of female political representatives and so forth.
As first steps.
As first steps. So if I was to be in charge of all these commissions, having done a review of what was lacking and putting ideas for what ideally should be in place for not just the Gender Equality Commission but all these other ones. And the one I'm most familiar with is the National Commission on the Rights of the Child, because I was working with Indra on that. And I know I attended the United Nations and so forth because these things are important, and because we were lacking in terms of, and I'm talking globally, the world at large, it was necessary to have a special session at the United Nations with regard to children. I'm sure they had them with regard to women and all other, important things. So I think the first step was assessing where we were, brainstorming to see where we needed to go, and then basically working towards, achieving those goals with, and I would hasten to add, the Guyana experience as opposed to the so-called models that we have. For everything there's some model that someone's done it and tried it and it's worked, or it may not have worked. I'm always in favor of us dealing with the Guyana experience. Models are fine theoretically, but let's be realistic and tailor it to our realities and what's going on in Guyana.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I covered a bit of what you were asking, but my question was more difficult than talking.
Yes, as a younger person, one of the things you saw was inequality, because that sticks in my mind
Yes.
as the one thing that you have sort of just plucked out. Is there any other issue that that would have struck you?
Bearing in mind, I've been living in Guyana since 1997.
Yeah.
Where life in Guyana was very different to how it is now. Different in that a lot of the times things were being done without knowing sometimes why. And this example I'm giving you from a medical aspect, but let me just change it slightly. When I started Kids First Fund work in 1999, before that, I was doing advocacy on a case-by-case basis without any formal office. I would accompany people to a doctor where they didn't know what they had, what ailment they were suffering from. Most people had like a white tablet, didn't have a name on it, in a little handwritten envelope.
Mm-hmm.
And when you question, sometimes you would not get a good response. One of the things now, when Kids First started, we wanted a medical report with a clear understanding what is wrong, so that this would form a basis of a history for the person. And a doctor could be, you have this opinion now, and then you take this mode of treatment, and then after that you assess and see how you're going. People who came to the office for different problems, not medical, when you asked a woman, what do you do for a living? She said, nothing. I said, when you say nothing, oh, I'm just a housewife. I said, this is not just a housewife, as you were saying, the CEO of the family. Just a housewife is, the person who is the Minister of Finance for the family.
That's right.
You
Minister
got
of
to
Health.
cut and save, and Minister of Health, because
Economics.
she'll boil the fever grass tea and give you when you're feeling unwell, because that might be the cheap option to going to a doctor, spending a whole heap of time and maybe money. She would also be like a mediator. She'd be a counsel of sorts, to solve family upsets and what have you. Then she's a tutor.
Cleaner.
Yep. She's a tutor to help the children with their homework. Even if she may not have gone as far in school, she's learning over. Then she's cooking, washing, cleaning.
Gardening.
She's the wife, she's the gardener, she's the... Yeah, she's so many things. And as Indra had mentioned in the little chat we had before, when you mention how important just a housewife is, it is a revelation, because it's just been so long the accepted thing,
Unpaid labor.
with unpaid labor without any sort of recognition, that you really didn't realize just how important it is.
Very good. I tell you what, Indra, you wanted to make a quick...
I was going to say, I'm very glad that Varshini raised that point, because you see, women for their whole lives, for centuries, and we know from as long as we know ourselves, we've been always told,
where a woman's place is supposed to be. Your place is within the home, and this is what you're supposed to do, and this is how you're supposed to behave, and your religion defines you in this way, and your custom defines you in this or that way, and so you're supposed to conform. And every time you try to break out of that, then you're supposed to be not so good a woman because you want to play a man. And I can give experiences of my own childhood as a girl. When I wanted to be involved in politics, it was considered something very bad. Coming back to the issue that Varshni raised about what led us to wanting to do all these things. Again, women always will be part of everything in the home, in the community. Look at election time. Who does all the hard work? The women are everywhere. They're doing everything. They're committed. They're disciplined. But yet when it comes to being considered for position and to be given proper positions, they are not given the fair treatment. And if you look, and this is something that we're talking about, not for today, a while ago, that we want women to have equality, we want women to be involved in decision making. We're starting at 1/3, but we're going to move towards 50%, because today we are 51% of the population. But that is for the future.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to take it step by step to get there, because there's some people who say, well, we want people who are competent. And they're giving the impression that women are incompetent, they're illiterate, they don't have the abilities. Well, that is not so, because when we look at the institutions, our women have been coming out, they're educated, and wherever you put a woman, she performs to her very best. And so we are going to make sure that we don't stop at 1/3, but we'll work towards the desired amount.
Mm-hmm.
And we will also ensure that wherever the women are, they will do their very best. Because people are talking about quota system, and you know, you give quota because the women are left behind, but we have enough competent women in this country to be placed in positions.
You know, while Varshni was making her intervention, she went to the point of identifying the necessity for, I'll use my word, benchmarking, establishing where you were or where you are. A lot of the discussion on women's issues seem to be very subjective and emotive, with very little empirical kind of input that would allow for the objective understanding of what the condition is. You know, it is one thing to say that women are mistreated. It's another thing to say that women are paid less in a general sense, but nobody bothers to establish at a certain point in time
The research, then, you
what
need the research.
what in fact one is talking about. Entry points, points of progression of a system, if that is one of the things that you're concerned about, equal pay for equal work, this whole question. Now, so I ask you now, as the commission, is it part of your thrust to work towards the question of establishing benchmarks for the things you deem you need to change?
Let me read one of the main functions of the Commission. The Women and Gender Equality Commission shall promote national recognition and acceptance that women's rights are human rights, respect for gender equality, and the protection, development, and attainment of gender. And that is one of the leading ones. I mean, when you think in terms of us being 51%, more than 50% of the population, it by right that if you are a larger half or whatever it is, that you should really be there to perform or to give your contribution towards development. And I think that is one of the main areas. We are more, so we should be more involved. If you look at, you were talking about statistics. I mean, there are so many researches that have been done. And when you think in terms of, even you think in terms of the children at school, for some reason, the girls are performing better than the boys at the secondary level. At university, you have more women 60%. Graduating from university level and going on to further education. there was a time when the United Nations paid a lot of attention to the girl child. And for some of us, we say we paid attention to the girl child, trying to let her pull up her bootstrings, to let her be somebody who can make a contribution to society. And we left the boy child behind. And now we have to pull them along, because they are the ones who, in some cases, if you don't push them, they just go part of the way. They would go to technical institute and get the technical part of it and decide, well, look, I can be a mechanic and I stop here. He's not going on to university, whereas the girl would go on. So there are researches around which show that the women are performing better. And by right, if you are performing better, you should get the positions in the whatever field is. And so we have the case of more women coming to the fore and taking what I will call their rightful place in society.
But
Could
go
I-
ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Raj. It's okay.
Can I just say a couple of things? Whilst we have statistics that we wish to achieve and have achieved in terms of women's participation at the political level, and we're endeavouring to increase nationally across the board, if we don't perform, I mean, we don't want to just make up a statistic,
No.
so we're just going to pick any 50%
No.
of women
No.
qualified, the standard, you know, if we don't meet that standard, women or not, then you have to find somebody else, one thing. Not that we would just find anyone just to make this percentage that we wish to achieve, or that we want any laxing in standards to achieve that.
True.
The other part is that the idea of educate a girl child was really because the onus of educating children usually always falls on the woman. So you educate a girl child, you educate a family.
Correct.
As Cheryl was saying, our boys are not faring as well as the girls, and you know, and also Dr. Grantley, we do need to do research, and we do need to get statistics so that the things that we are not achieving the same levels of promotion, the same levels of pay as our male counterparts can be proven, you know, without a doubt. Empirical is, you know, empirical proof and evidence and so forth. And it helps us to measure, as we've said, where we've come from, how far we've got to go to achieve the goals we wish to make. So I would say, in answer to your question, which I think kind of went a little by the wayside, is that yes, we do need to. Stuff has been done, but we need to do more in order to.
Well, I was going to come to that because in 1989, when we were talking about violence in our society, we didn't have the statistics. Dans and Shiv Prasad did a research to show that out of every, I think it was 5, right? Out of 5, 3 women had experienced some form of violence or another. So that was a research that prompted the women organizations to get involved to ensure that we make this thing public, we have more activism so that people can become aware of what is happening. And that is one of the reasons why eventually we had the domestic violence legislation. Because prior to 96, violence was treated as a family affair, you know that, and a family thing. And if a woman is beaten, that's fine. She stays home, she takes her licks, and you can't go to the police because the police will say, man, y'all patch it up, you know? I mean, it's a family thing. But prior, after 96, it was a different issue. Now, the other thing, take education. When we go back into 1953, girls were not going to school.
No.
It was a campaign. I remember in 1953, Mrs. Jagan herself, when the WPO started, that was one of the clarion call right across the country, and we have the information that they were going to rural communities, all kinds of community, telling mothers to send their girl children to school, precisely because of the point that Varshini made. If you educate the mother, she will educate her family, which is so important. We're seeing it everywhere. The other thing that we need to talk about is the question of equal pay for work of equal value. This matter came to our attention at the Commission. And when we started, let's talk a bit about the public service. There is no disparity in terms of wages at the public service level. Men and women receive whatever is their due. However, we have to look within the private sector. And that is something we are going to look into, to see wherever it exists. And I know many years ago when we tried to go to the girls working in Regent Street and at the sweatshops, they will be afraid to talk to you, and they're telling you that we're supposed to sign for this amount, and where in essence we receive less money. That exists, but we need to find the information. It's difficult because the women are afraid that if they give you the information, then they lose their job. So that is something we need to work with. So the question of a wage disparity in the public service, it doesn't exist. But it do exist in the private sector. And again, it cannot only be hearsay, I agree with you. Also, the Commission has 14 objectives, one of which is to promote research or to carry out research in any areas we see or we deem or it is deemed necessary to carry out research. We have the responsibility to do that. And we have already talked about sexual harassment at the place of work. It is something that we're looking into, all right?
Could I just ask you, access to promotion in the public service?
It's not a problem.
Both genders have equal access to promotion?
Yeah.
Well, I tell you, the fact that you're asking a question means that, in a certain sense, you're not certain. I would just like to say, just before we close this segment, that among some of the things which, whenever one is engaged in change, it is always best for everyone to be aware of what is it you're changing, which means that you really have to understand the extant condition quite well. And in a certain sense, even as I was contemplating the direction for this program, there's something that occurred to me, that the Gender and the Women and Gender Equality Commission, in terms of one of its activities and mandates, or mandates and the activities which flow from them, partnering with the University of Guyana.
We're partnering with everybody right now.
In many ways, I see so many social science students coming out of that place. Their final year big paper, thesis, could all rally around specific issues which allow for the collection of information on various indices, which would allow one to say, in the matter of equality and equal pay, equal work, on the matter of promotional there's a little paper that is being done. There's a little research that's being done that could ultimately be put across it. The truth is that the discussion on women's rights could only be assisted by the more empirical information that there is available, because that is what ultimately forces one to say, my God, that is the situation. We will take a break at this time, and then when we return, we should attempt to look at the whole question of reflecting of the woman's agenda in the whole question, in the context of national policy making, and how one that we are going to be looking at is the budget. That's where we will start. We'll take a break at this time. You know, among some of your stated functions, is one simply listed as to promote the empowerment of women. Perhaps what you could do is tell us how you create the empowerment of women.
Okay, it's a simple statement, but I think when you look at its implication and its impact, it is very great. Because you can literally do 100 things to empower women, but we want to to use it in our context, in the sense, we have to make sure, firstly, you have the policies that are there in place to help women. You need to ensure that there are legislations in place to help women. You need to make sure the mechanisms are there to help them. You need to ensure the support systems are there to help them. I would say those are the immediate thoughts that come to my mind when you start thinking about empowering women. And then you have to look at the practical things that needs to be done, and which can be 100 or more things, because you may want to talk about if it is women in the productive sector, women in the economy, women in health, women and rights, women in decision making, women in rural communities, women in hinterland. So you can, how do you empower women? So you have to look at those basic things that I've talked about to ensure those safeguards are there to protect them.
I would like
Also, having been a signatory, or Guyana being a signatory to CEDAW and all the different conventions in which you are required to do a number of things, all of those safeguards and all of those conventions, you must sign on to them. So in a macro perspective, those are the things that you focus on, and then you start getting into what are the things that affect women on a daily basis and try to see how you can prioritize them. So I will let Cheryl come in at this point in time.
I wanted to say that you have to train women. Training is important, and one of the things you must get them to do, to believe in themselves, so that they can raise their self-esteem. So when you teach them to, stand up for your own rights, and you have the ability to do this, so go for it. You give them that sort of an encouragement to move on. We have a lot of laws relating to women's rights and so forth, and what can happen to help them. The other thing is the implementation. So we have to tell them what is necessary, what are the things that you can do to help yourself, who you report to, who you complain to, who you say what, so that you have that ability. Look, I don't have to take it and sit back. I can tell somebody who will give me some help. And then you have people who will help you to implement the laws that are there. Implementation is our big problem. And although the laws are there and they say what to do with sexual harassment, what to do with domestic violence and so forth, it is how it's implemented. We have to work in collaboration with the agencies, the judiciary, the police, the welfare officers, those who have like help and shelter and those places, so that we can all be singing from the same hymn book, and we'll know how to relate to our women, so they too can stand up for themselves and move on. They must be able to walk away from an abusive relationship. But the training is very, very important.
Can I?
Go ahead.
I want to come back to the point that Cheryl raised with respect to training and self-esteem and self-confidence program. It is so critical, because we're talking about a woman who for centuries and decades have been told that your place is at home. And suddenly you're saying to this woman, look, you need to come out, you need to get involved. But she doesn't have that self-esteem because she feels she's worthless. So you have to develop that skill in her, to believe in herself. And as we were making the point, to teach the women to respect herself. So from a mere not doing anything at home, as was said before, that I don't do nothing. So she didn't see what she's doing at home as something. To teach her to respect what she's doing and to value that, and to get her into the entry point where she's prepared to leave the confines of the wall, to go out there, to get herself educated at some level. And I want to share with you the whole concept of the Women's Leadership Institute, when it was set up in 1996, was to give ordinary women who never had a chance to go to school. It was not intended at all for educated women, because educated women already have their self-esteem and confidence, and they would have gone through to some high school or some university. The uneducated, who either because of their customs or traditions or financial situation were unable to acquire the basic of education. And that institute would have helped them to lift them so that they feel that, you know what, I am somebody, that I can do something. Now I have gone to this institute. I have a little certificate to say that I have participated or I have elevated myself. And we have seen hundreds of women growing out of this process, and it is the way to go, so that in different parts of Guyana, where those women who don't have or didn't have the possibility to educate themselves in the basic of way, they must be able to have that. Now, there's one more thing we need to talk, and I think Varshni, when she started to talk about the health issue, you know, a lot of women, when they go to the hospital to take their kids, and the doctor will tell them whatever it is, they are afraid, and they're so shy, they will never ask, well, what are the impact, what is the implication, what if this doesn't happen? They will never speak. They go to school, and they want to see their children's school books, and if they ask questions and the teacher speak to them very loudly, they shut up. We want our women to be able to go question the doctor, to question the teacher, to question anybody. That if you're saying that I come to you for a service and you can't provide the service, I must be able to question you and ask why and how, and that's the kind of thing we want of our women.
Varshni, you wanted to make an intervention?
Yes. Although just going on what Indra said, it's not always because the woman is timid. Sometimes we have people who are in public service who are not always best suited for public service, and the manner in which I have no problem advocating what I'm trying to get across or to extract whatever information I need with regard to patients or whatever, but sometimes you do encounter people that are trying, and the courtesy, the little extra mile, the care. We have people that roll into our office and not coming under, and you'll remember when you were minister how many times I called you with regard to somebody who rolled through my office door, and many other people also. Taking, that extra minute to listen, which is part of the thing, and finding out where they need to go, advising them how to pulling ahead, and that little bit of human understanding, that human caring, which was rampant in Guyana, and we seem to have lost in terms of, development, fast-paced life. We're talking on cell phones and everyone's too busy sometimes. That is the thing that puts people off, not because, that they're timid.
I'm fascinated about the Commission and how it interfaces with the institutions of the state and the public at large. If you were to look at the agenda of your commission, for instance, what kinds of things might we find? Can a member of the public approach you? And what kinds of issues are you equipped to treat with? And treat with in a normal way. Institutions, and the next one we will talk about, as I did promise at the end of the last segment, is the question of the national budget. Because presumably, as the Women, Gender and Equality Commission, you must have a sense about the transformative role that you expect that the budget is going to facilitate for women in the country at large. And so we will talk about that. But first, let's just talk in a general sense as a commission in terms of the way in which you operate, whether with the opportunities for interventions in an institutional sense and or the interactions with the public at large.
Okay, I think I'll come in here by firstly saying that the very nature of the composition of the commission is one in which commissioners were elected by a consensual mechanism in which people like from trade union movement came together, unions came together, the women organizations, or the private sector came together and said, this is our nominee. So we were all elected from a process. So we came from organizations. So we're not here except maybe Magda Pollard and Shalimar Haq and Vanda Rastik. They represent women interests. But all the other individuals, they're coming from organizations. So we have to work with stakeholders. And stakeholders can be 150 organizations. So we interface with them and we have taken decisions on a yearly basis. We will interact with our stakeholders to hear what they want us to do. What are their concerns? So we've started that process. We've heard them last year. So we've taken what they've said, what are their critical issues, and we fashion it into a program to address that. In addition, we look at our mandates, and we decided that these are the things based on our mandates we would also like to do. Let me give you an example. For example, last year, it was election year. And we wanted to engage the political parties at the level of the presidential candidates. So the commission invited all the parties to our meeting to tell us what is it they want to do for women as stated in their manifestos. So we had the opportunity to listen to Mr. Donald Ramotar, Mr. Granger, and from the AFC we had Sheila Holder and others, and we had Mr. Everett Franklin. And it was a really good discussion because it had never happened before. Our commissioners were able to engage them. So what we have done, we now, having got from all these presidential hopefuls then, their vision of what they wanted for women, which we've kept, and we also looked at their manifestos to see what they promise and what they, in essence, have is one and the same. We have a committee that is looking at that. And later on, we will be writing to them to remind them that you promised A, you promised B, you did this, but you did not honor your obligation. But we're not there as yet, but we're working towards that. And also in terms of the unions, we looked at occupational safety for workers. Because today in the world of work, you have bad lighting, you have bad chairs, you're sitting at computers, and all kinds of problems. So we looked at that from the perspective of the trade unions. And then we also look at the question of women organization, sexual harassment. So those are some of the issues. Then we didn't finish there. We realized that if anybody wants to do a research on the women parliamentarians since 1953, you can find it in one document. We were able to get the Parliament Office to do that research, and now that is available. They will also be doing for us all the male parliamentarians, so that if you want to have information, it is available and it's at your fingertips. So we're looking at that. So based on the 14 objectives, we look at what is the need of the country at that given time, what are the critical issues, and then we try to fashion a program. For this year, we have identified 10 core issues which we're focusing on. So we do not work in an ad hoc way. We study our mandates, we go back to what our stakeholders wanted, and then we try to fashion a program to suit those realities.
Could I just
before you come back,
Sure.
one of the other things we're doing is that we're going out to meet our stakeholders.
As of
so
next
we're going
month.
regional, and we're going to the various
All the
regions so that we
regions,
can talk to our people, let them know what our mandate is, and to find some of the issues that they would like us to look at. So that is in train as well. Go ahead, Varsha.
which is very important. I was invited to a meeting, a working meeting at Pegasus by the Commission, whereas we were to put forward recommendations of things we would like to see. We had 2 questions to address, and we came into groups, and as a stakeholder, they were receptive, they listened, and I asked what came of the recommendations. As a stakeholder, Kids for Citizens Advice Bureau, so forth, you do attend these things, you do give recommendations, and Indra told me that it is being encompassed into the mandate. It's always good to know, like say something is adopted that was recommended, to sort of share what new things have come about as a result. Otherwise you feel sometimes you're attending things, you're talking, it's a bit of a lip service, you write down recommendations and you see nothing sort of come of it. And just one last quick tiny thing, going back to, you were speaking of empowerment. Empowerment to me, and for women, is life skills training for the girl child. So by the time she becomes a woman, she has the self-esteem, she has like peace studies, peaceful conflict resolution, peaceful communication. She has a toolkit at her disposal of how to face different situations. She's not sheltered. So for existing women, you can still, adult women rather, you can still teach this. It's a little bit harder because you do have to break through the walls of social norm and years of historical and cultural upbringing. But this toolkit, with the view to empowering them through training, education and training, leading to economic independence, so that they can contribute to society economically, not just as the CEO of the home. But I feel that there is a degree of, there is a big degree of empowerment and an increase in self-confidence when a woman is able to bring money to, the family. There's less likely for economic abuse to happen also, because you're not totally dependent on, the spouse to bring the money home. So there's a lot of benefit like that. But peace studies, peaceful communication, peaceful conflict resolution, I think should be mandatory in the workplace, in schools, for boys and girls, so that then we train you peacefully, you become peaceful adults, and we're less likely to have, all these inequalities and violent behavior.
Very good.
Excellent. Two quick questions, direct follow-up to the contributions of all three of you. Are you obliged to produce an annual report which deals with all of these things that we have just discussed here?
Yeah.
Yes.
Your interventions in the course of the year and the focus, and where you would like to take the conversation, if it is a conversation?
Yes, we have submitted to the National Assembly our first year's report with recommendations, and the clerk of the National Assembly has indicated to us that our recommendations have been sent to the agencies to which they were supposed to be channeled. So
That is exactly the second question.
Yeah.
We're looking forward to a good response.
Yes, in terms of your relationship with the institutional presence of the state,
Yeah.
whether in education or whatever, because certainly rights of the as one has been saying ever so often, women and gender equality concerns girls, and girls are in schools, and the education department is a critical area there, and for some of us we see major dysfunctionalities occurring with all of the
I work in
cleavages.
I work in education, and one of the things we have more women in education than men, with female teachers. So we don't have enough males so that the young boys can sort of have a role model. And we need more males to be in the education system. At the Teachers Training College, when you look at graduation, 90% women.
Yes, I have noted that too. Now let me just we are going to have a budget by March 30th. What opportunities have you had as a commission to impact on that budget? The preparation of and/or
But the way the budgets are prepared since last year, August, all the agencies were required to look at their programs, and then you budget or you put up a proposal as to what you want. We also were part in a different way, that our commission, we established what it is we want to do for 2012, and the budget proposal was made. Now you may ask, let's say we ask for $50 million, there's no guarantee that you will get $50 million. So we have said, well, in terms of our work plan for advocacy or the research or administrative, these are the areas that we would like to have so much money. And that is the process, and it is the same for every other agency.
well, I have a little bit slightly different take, and you may wish to consider it, as this is just on-air consultation. I suspect that one of the things that the commission will be doing, being the beneficiary of all of these exchanges with all kinds of interest groups, that you may perceive that there is a certain focus, which does not necessarily have to do with your operations as a line item in anything, but you perceive that there is a certain focus which should be engaged, because you think that this would facilitate a transformation you have deemed to be essential. Engagement of more women in the workforce. Just take anything, one of these things. And I suspect, therefore, that affects the consideration of the budget. And certainly if one is going to be, if there's a place where you could have a concerted view, because you certainly have access, from what I heard you represent, to a large number of groups, that some critical things may be coming through that you may want to reflect as priority items, which should be considered by the budget agency, the Ministry of Finance, even as they are putting together the national budget, which presumably would have certain foci, and you want to be able to affect that because you have a major constituency that you're dealing with. Anyway,
we can do that. We can do that in the sense that there's nothing that is cast in stone. It depends on the level of advocacy at our level to the Ministry of Finance and whoever.
The truth is, I was hoping that your work, your annual program, your annual report would reflect some of these areas that you deem to be appropriate to cause, to effect the kinds of transformation that you see in the society, because it is out of those things that the ideas permeate the rest of the
I guess it's hard to pinpoint it down to a select few, bearing in mind how vast your mandate is.
But I just want to say, for the first year, it was a different thing. But as we grow and we get better, I think we will be able to perfect the way we prepare our annual reports and do things. But I want to remind you that we also collaborate, because we have partnered, for example, with USAID in a lot of activities we've had. We've partnered with the British and stuff like that. So it can be, you don't have to necessarily only go to government. We have that option. We have our budget. We have a program budget, but also you can partner with other people to do things together.
Grant, I want to agree with you, and I think consultation is an important aspect in getting the budget done. And I think the people who are preparing the budget should call in the commissions as so that we have those discussions and to see much more. It's not, we're not talking in terms of what the commission wants in the budget, but what people, women and gender.
That's correct. You're bringing those large focus.
Right.
I'll tell you, the last thing I want to talk about is I am looking at one of the piece of paraphernalia that you put out, which shows some very nice and attractive looking pictures of 18 persons, one being a man. 16 of these are resident commissioners. 2 of them, or 3 of them come from other commissions. One man.
One man.
Is that the best thing for the dialogue, for the discussion which you wish to engage?
We would have liked more men.
We want more men.
But only one man came forward.
And as a
and
matter
was selected. It's women and gender, so we're not only talking about women. But only one man came
Well,
forward.
I wondered about that as I went through your activity, your objectives and mandates and that kind of thing.
We must tell you that all the activities we've had, we strive to have 50-50 to get men to come out.
Perhaps appeal.
And they don't come out. Well, we don't know what will bring them out.
And the ones who come say that they enjoy what we were talking about, so they can
perhaps there's a fear for women.
Too many women around.
No, this looks as if this is a flip side of something else.
They have other interests, maybe.
They have other interests.
Or appeal for more men to come forward.
Yes, I think the general point that is being made is that all have to be involved, and you can't take a half of the thing and decide that you're going to bring about change.
But Cheryl made the point about the male teachers. For example, Mr. Everett Franklin, the late Everett Franklin, when he came to us, he was making the point that boys today don't have enough role models, starting within their homes. And this is where we have a lot of problems. Because in the school system, the mother disciplined the child at home, and when they go to school, the teacher, who is a woman, disciplined them. So some of these boys grew up with some of these grudges against women. One also need to think about that. So if they have an aggressive woman in their life, so they would want to perhaps do whatever is
Obviously,
required.
we will have to let those be the last words on this issue of Spotlight, where the focus has been on the agenda for women. We have attempted in this issue to explore essentially with the women and Gender Equality Commission to try and isolate some of the larger issues that they see as impacting on this particular area of such a very large constituency. Nearly half of this country happen to be women. And though, of course, we have just touched on a number of the areas of concern, we want to engage this conversation with a view to seeing what other areas, specific areas in that conversation that would be engaged. This is how it's happened. We have done many of these programs, and based on what we see coming up, the letter contributions to the newspapers sometimes flow to these discussions, etc. And there may be one or two of them that people specifically want to have ventilated. I know, for instance, this business of domestic violence, which is all around us and perhaps consuming us, to the point where we are losing focus on the efforts at sustainably developing a country and an economy, and a just and a humane society, and it's which are all part and parcel of the focus of a commission such as yours. So we will leave this one here, and let me thank therefore Ms. Indra Chandra-Paul, Ms. Cheryl Sampson, and Ms. Vashni Singh for participating in this is the first one on the agenda for women. And and I promise you that we are going to look at some of the sub-issues, even as this is becoming so much more critical as we attempt to fashion this society, this country, and hopefully we can do something with an increasing state of proper welfare in this country. I'm Grantley Waldron saying good night from Spotlight.